Thank you. Please be seated. This is the matter of the State of Washington versus Edward C. Troyer Jr., Pierce County District Court, case number 1AC 002225. These proceedings are being live streamed to the Pierce County District Court website. Viewers on the live stream are reminded, however, that they are prohibited from photographing or audio or video recording these proceedings without the prior permission of the court. This prohibition applies to courtroom observers as well. Only credentialed media which have been granted permission from the court in advance are permitted to photograph, audio, and or video record these proceedings as outlined in the court's November 4, 2022 media coverage order. The courtroom observers, jurors have a duty to decide this case based only on the evidence presented. To ensure both parties receive a fair trial, it is my duty to minimize the risk that jurors are influenced by external factors. For this reason, courtroom observers are prohibited from wearing clothing or accessories with political or social justice messaging. If you are currently wearing or displaying anything that meets this description, please cover it up right away. Thank you, everyone, for your cooperation. Is the state ready to proceed with the trial?
Yes, Your Honor, but I wanted to give the court some information about timelines that I shared with the defense. As
Please.
you know, the extra difficulty in scheduling witnesses is that many of the witnesses are represented by counsel, including counsel who are not local. So we were able to bring in an extra witness this afternoon, and then what that leaves is Mr. Altheimer, who has previously been scheduled to come in tomorrow morning, and we had to work that out with his paper route. Officer McCrae, who is not available today, and then Officer Lawless. I texted him and his attorney over lunch, and they will be here tomorrow as well. Those are the final three witnesses the state has, and then we'll be resting after that. But it's clear we're going to finish early tomorrow. The state would like to address the testimony of Mrs. Troyer at 3 o'clock. I think that's about how long we'll go. If we don't go that long, we got the brief this morning. We're not able to deal with that while we're in court. So we would like an opportunity to take a look at that and address the court at 3 o'clock on that matter. So we
Today?
all know today. So we all know tomorrow morning before Mr. Altheimer testifies what the ruling is.
Thank you. Defense?
That's fine, Your Honor, thank you.
Anything else?
No, thank you.
All right. If you'd please bring the jury in. And I should let you know, we moved the easel back a little bit so juror 10 would have a full view of the witness when they're testifying. So that we moved it just back a little. The jury is returning to the courtroom. Thank you. Everyone may be seated. The state's next witness.
Thank you, Your Honor. State calls Lieutenant Gordon Stark.
Please raise your right hand to be sworn. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes.
Have a seat, please. State your name and spell your last name.
Okay. Robert Gordon Stark, S-T-A-R-K.
Ms. Serrano.
Thank you. Lieutenant Stark, what is your occupation?
Police officer, police lieutenant actually, for the city of Tacoma.
And how long have you worked with Tacoma Police Department?
28 years.
And do you have any prior law enforcement experience?
No.
And what are your current duties?
I'm the operations administrative lieutenant.
Okay. I want to talk to you about a call Sheriff Ed Troyer made to a 911 dispatcher in January 2021.
Object to the use of the term 911, Your Honor, given the evidence adduced thus far. It's an inside line.
Sustained.
I want to talk to you about a call Sheriff Ed Troyer made to a dispatcher in January 2021. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, ma'am.
Were you working in the early morning hours of January 27th, 2021?
I was.
And what shift were you working?
Graves.
And what were your duties that night?
I was the shift commander.
And what does a shift commander do?
Pretty much oversees operational and administrative functions of patrol. For critical incidents, we leverage other resources if we get short so we can get back up.
And did you become aware of an officer needs help call at approximately 2:05 a.m.?
Yes.
And how did you become aware of the call?
The tone came out over the air, over the radio, and advised us of what was going on and the address, and I responded.
And where were you when you first heard it over the radio?
I was at headquarters.
And what did you hear?
Basically, the officer needs help.
And did you have any information regarding who was calling for help?
It did involve the sheriff.
Okay. And what did you do after hearing this information?
Well, I was in my office at the time, and so I just left and walked out, got in my car, and headed that direction.
Okay. And did the priority status of the call change while you were en route to the scene?
It did.
And how did that affect the way you traveled to the scene?
Well, I turned my emergency lights and siren off and then just responded routine.
Okay. So what factors did you consider in deciding to go to the scene?
Well, it involved an elected official, and so I went to make sure the supervisor at the scene, see if he needed any further assistance from me to update myself from the scene so I could report it back up through my chain of command.
Okay. And what time did you arrive?
I arrived at about 2:19, so about 2:20.
Okay. And if I may, Your Honor, I'm going to ask the witness to step down. If you could show the jury which street you took to get to the location.
What exhibit are you referring to?
This is 4, I believe. I think 3, Exhibit 3. Go ahead.
Okay. So I came in off a Narrows Drive, and I would have turned here on Bridgeview and made my way up around here, and I think I parked somewhere along here
Okay.
because of the other patrol cars in the area.
Okay, and if you can go ahead and stand there. What, can you describe what you first saw when you walked onto 27th and Deidre?
Again, there were a number of patrol cars parked along here, so I parked and I walked up and I saw, I think, Mr. Altheimer's car was first, and then Mr. Troyer's vehicle was, I think, maybe on the other side of Deidre.
Okay, you can go ahead and sit down. Thank you. And what did you do when you arrived there?
I went and contacted the sergeant on scene,
Okay, and who was that?
Steve Storick.
Okay, and is he a supervisor?
Yes.
And did you speak with Sheriff Troyer?
Only I saw him and I asked him if he needed anything, and he said he was good, and that was it.
Okay, what happened next?
Sergeant Storick and I walked to the side so he could give me a brief on what was going on.
Okay. And did you talk with Officer Lawless or any other officers at the scene?
I don't recall talking to either one of them, to them on the scene, just Sergeant Storick.
Okay. And how long were you there at the scene?
Less than 10 minutes.
Okay. Did you notify anyone about the situation after leaving the scene?
I did. My immediate supervisor, Captain Hayes.
And why did you do that?
Well, it was a significant incident, and so it was one of those incidents that, you report through your chain of command in case that he had any requirements that he wanted to talk to me about.
And how did you notify him?
I sent an email, and I think afterwards we may have talked by phone.
Okay. Did you provide, what information did you provide, if any, to Captain Wade?
It was a copy of the computer-aided dispatch about what came out. I did a quick tally on how many patrol vehicles or how many units responded or said they were en route. I think I put in there that I overheard Mr. Altimer making some comments.
Okay, all right,
I object, he wasn't finished with his answer.
go ahead.
I think he's finished.
Sustained.
Okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I'm trying to think through the email about what all I put in it. But it was basically summing up the scene.
Okay. And did you become aware of a report later about, or did you have further involvement with Sheriff Troyer?
Not with Sheriff Troyer, but with maybe something that occurred after the
Yes.
initial scene, yeah.
What did you, what happened later?
Sergeant Storick called me and said that he got a report from another deputy that Mr. Altimer arrived at the sheriff's house and threw a newspaper in his driveway.
Okay. And did you take any action upon hearing this?
I just had him send the officers by to do a welfare check, and if they didn't need to, there's no need to contact the sheriff.
And why did you do that?
Just to make sure that everything was going to be okay.
Okay. And do you know which officers went to check on the house?
I think Officer Lawless was one of the officers.
And what did they report back to you?
Excuse me. That they saw a newspaper sitting in the sheriff's driveway.
Okay. Was there any further action?
No.
Was a report written about this incident, the officer needs help call?
Yes.
And who wrote that report?
Officer Lawless.
And who determined that a report would be written?
Well, I think initially between the conversation with me and Captain Hayes, we thought it would be in the department's best interest to actually write an official report instead of putting notes in the CAD,
And why did you feel it was necessary?
just in case something came about it later on.
And do you happen to know what the date was of that report?
The date was, the report was the 28th,
And the incident was on the 27th.
correct.
Why was the report written a day later?
Objection, lack of foundation, speculation, Your Honor.
Sustained.
Does Tacoma Police Department have a policy or procedure regarding when a report should be written following an incident?
For arrest, yes.
What is that policy?
If,
There were no arrests, Your Honor.
right.
Sustained.
I was asking about the policy, and he's explaining what the policy is for arrests.
Thank you, Your Honor.
How about for non-arrests?
Well, we can submit a report. There's nothing that says that it has to be submitted within 24 or 48 hours, but we typically don't like to allow reports to hang out there that long.
Okay. Is there any reason Officer Lawless wasn't asked to write the report before the end of his shift?
Objection, lack of foundation, unless it's referring to this witness, Your Honor.
Yeah, please sustained, but you can rephrase the question.
You testified earlier that you and Captain Wade decided a report should be written. Is that right?
Yeah, it was Captain Hayes.
Captain Hayes.
Yeah.
Captain
That's
Hayes.
okay.
And did you have a further role in making sure that that occurred, that a report
I did,
was written?
yes.
What was your role?
To review the narrative of the report, just to make sure it was, you know, pretty much what the officer observed or witnessed, and I just wanted to review it for content and had him change a few grammatical errors and take some other flowery language out of the report, so.
But prior to receiving the report,
Mhm.
did you have any specific role in directing any officer to
Oh,
write a report?
I think I got a hold of Sergeant Storick and said, you know, have the officers write a report
Okay. And when did that conversation occur?
that morning.
Okay. And I'm sorry, I'm going to ask you, did you reviewed the report?
I reviewed the narrative and told him I liked the narrative was good, and then to submit his report, and then it would be approved through regular channels. So another supervisor will review the report.
Okay. So when multiple officers respond to an incident and there's a determination that a report should be written, does Tacoma Police Department have a policy or procedure regarding which officer should write the report?
It's typically the primary officer, the first officer on scene, or the first officer that's going to write the general report.
Is there a requirement for any other officers to write a report from the same incident?
If they had any role, any investigative role in that, yes.
Pass the witness.
Cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Lieutenant.
Good afternoon.
I'm Ann Bremner, and I'm defending Sheriff Troyer in this case. I just have a few questions for you, if I could.
Okay, absolutely.
Would it be fair to say that Officer Lawless was asking you to find somebody else to write the report in this case? Do you remember that?
No,
He never said, can someone else do this, or can you find somebody else? Does that jog your memory?
no,
Could that have happened?
not that I recall.
Okay. And as a lieutenant, did you think that this was a thorough report?
I did, I reviewed the narrative, yes.
Was there any notification of Sergeant Troyer that a report was being written and submitted?
I'm sorry, repeat that again?
Did anybody notify Sheriff Troyer that a report was being written and submitted the next day?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. On the report, I have one question for you on it, and it's dealing with at least a statement that was purportedly from him, and it says this. And actually accurately.
Objection,
Sorry,
Your Honor.
I'm sorry, what? Your Honor, is there an objection?
Please ask your question.
Thank you, Your Honor. It says that here in the report, I assume Lawless, informed Troyer that Altimer appeared to be a newspaper carrier and that he was on his regular route. Troyer advised that we should let him go if that was the case. Do you remember that part of the report?
If that's what's in the report,
Yep.
then yeah, I read that. I don't recall it
So-
verbatim.
So basically that I informed Troyer, Altimer appeared to be a newspaper carrier, and he was on his regular route. Troyer advised we should let him go, if that was the case. And you said, do you remember that in the
Yes.
report? Okay. And in fact, Mr. Altimer was let go, is that right?
Correct.
How many years have you been on with TPD?
27 at the time.
Congratulations, or condolences. Have you ever been in a situation, this is really a general question, where you you saw some kind of suspicious activity,
Mhm.
you go investigate, and as you learn more facts, you discover it's kind of innocent behavior. There's no crime here, there's nothing to follow up on. Has that happened to you before? That
Yes.
the facts can change, is that
Right.
right? And given that something may change to an innocent scenario where there's no crime charged, no arrest, is it still important for officers to investigate suspicious activity nevertheless?
Yes, it is.
Can you describe the kind of suspicious activity that can be seen in just a residential neighborhood, any of our neighborhoods,
Objection, relevance.
Relevance?
as to what Sheriff Troyer saw that was suspicious?
Sustained.
I guess I was asking in his experience what he's seen in general.
Objection, relevance.
Relevance is sustained for the in general portion of the question.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'll ask a couple just questions. Specifically, in your experience and expertise, would somebody looking in the windows of somebody's house 2 a.m. potentially be suspicious?
Yes, it would.
Okay. Likewise, would somebody driving slowly through a neighborhood and going up to people's driveways with their lights out at 2 a.m. be suspicious?
Yes, it would.
Also, would somebody with their lights off going to someone's driveway with maybe a garage door opener and a flashlight look suspicious at 2 a.m?
Yes.
And so as an officer, would it be important to follow up in these types of circumstances to protect the neighborhood?
Yes.
Now, there was a second incident in this case, about 2 hours after the call, is that right?
Yes.
About a newspaper at Sheriff Troyer's house.
Mhm.
Were you aware that at that time Sheriff Troyer did not take any newspapers physically at the house?
No.
Did anybody look into that? Do you know?
No.
And so you had Lawless and somebody else drive by, right?
Yes.
Thank you. And were you aware that what also was described in the call, and by the way, this call was on an inside line, wasn't it, not 911?
From my understanding, yes.
Were you aware that Sheriff Troyer had said the same person that had threatened him earlier had come up in front of his house at 4 in the morning, revving his engine and screaming at his house and then pitching a
Faction,
newspaper?
facts not evidence.
I'm just asking if he's aware.
Overruled. Overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor. Were you aware of that?
No, I'm not aware of that.
Isn't it important when someone's been victimized and then they report that the person that victimized them is back at their house and acting in an aggressive fashion? Wouldn't it be important to look into that circumstance to protect that potential victim?
Yes.
And oftentimes, perpetrators retaliate, don't they?
Yes.
And it could be domestic violence, it could be property crime, it could be a physical crime. You can see retaliation in a lot of cases,
Yes.
and some of those are fatal
I am, yes.
or very serious.
Very serious, yes.
Did anybody at the Tacoma Police Department contact Sheriff Troyer to tell him a report was being written?
Objection asked and answered.
I don't believe it was, Your Honor.
The specific question was not asked, so overruled.
Thank you, Your Honor. Do you know if anybody at TPD told Sheriff Troyer that a report was being written?
No.
Are there a number of circumstances in your work where a report is not written?
Many.
Okay, can you give the jury some examples, just so they know?
Well, in this incident, this one could have been one of those that we didn't write a general report, other than we thought it was in the best interest of the department to write a report. It could have been entered in the computer-aided dispatch as notes, but they would have been a little more brief
Okay.
than a formal report.
And are there different types of reports that can be written by the police?
Oh, many.
When you went to the scene, I wasn't clear on this. By the time you got there, had everyone been called off?
Yes.
And how long did it take you to get there from where you were?
About 8 minutes.
And where did you start before you got there?
38th and Pine, where headquarters is at.
And as soon as you heard over the air that was being called off as the emergent, you drove normal speeds, no lights and siren, right?
Yes,
Okay. And you could have just not gone to the scene at all, is that right?
that's true.
Okay. But you chose to go anyway,
Yes.
right? And I think you said you've given testimony under oath in this case before. Do you remember that?
Yes.
And did you state under oath that you believed that Sheriff Troyer had been threatened?
I don't believe I said that I believed he had been threatened because I never spoke to the sheriff.
But as
I
you
had been told that initially the sheriff, the call was he was threatened.
And the question that was put to you under oath was, as you were going to the scene, you believed that the sheriff had been threatened. Isn't that right?
I wasn't under the belief of really much of anything right there. I wanted to get there and get a brief and find out what actually occurred.
Is it fair to say that with the prosecuting attorney's office, oftentimes threats on officers and assaults on officers aren't prosecuted?
Yes.
That's a shame, isn't it?
Yeah, it can be.
Thank you. That's all I have.
Redirect. You may step down.
Thanks, sir.
May this witness be excused?
Yeah,
No objection. Thank you, Lieutenant.
you are excused.
State calls Mike Blair.
Please raise your right hand to be sworn. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give in this matter is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
Yes, Your Honor.
Have a seat, please.
Thank you.
State your name and spell your last name.
My name is Mike Blair. Last name is Blair.
Ms. Yonam.
Thank you. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Blair, what is your occupation?
I'm retired.
And what did you do before you retired?
I worked for the Pierce County Sheriff's Department for a little over 27 years.
What was your most recent position?
Sergeant.
Can you please provide us with a chronology of the positions you've held at the department?
Sure. So I was hired in March of '95. Was a patrol deputy for 12 years. Served in the domestic violence unit and some other things as well. Was promoted to sergeant in 2007. And then in 2012, I took a position as the police chief in University Place, and I served there for 7 years. And then I spent 2 years down as Sheriff Paula Pastor's chief of staff. And then my last year, I went back to graveyard as a graveyard sergeant.
And when did you retire?
April 30th, 2022.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
I want to talk to you about a call Sheriff Ed Troyer made to a dispatcher in January 2021. Do you know what I'm talking about?
I do.
And were you working in the early morning hours of that day?
Yes, I was.
And what shift were you working?
Graveyard. Excuse me.
Go ahead.
Graveyard.
Graveyard. And where were you at approximately 2:05 a.m. on January 27th, 2021?
I was in the sergeant's office over at the South Hill Precinct, which is at 160th and Meridian in unincorporated Pierce County.
And can you just describe for us generally, what part of Pierce County is that?
That is right next to Thun Field, and it is just south of the city limits of Puyallup. As you go a little bit further south, you get into Graham area.
How did you become aware of the sheriff's call?
Excuse me. I was sitting in the office. I think I was doing payroll or reports, and I was there with another sergeant, and the beeper went off. The beeper is an alert tone, which means there's a priority. And it came across as I believe an officer needs help, and then it was identified as Sheriff Ed Troyer was the caller.
Okay. And what was your understanding of what was happening at the time the call was made?
My understanding was there was someone that showed up at his house and was threatening him, and they were kind of boxed in with each other,
Okay.
and he needed help.
And what did you do after hearing this call?
We went out, got in our cars, and started heading from 160th and Meridian somewhere over by Highway 16 and the Narrows Bridge.
And did you say we?
It's two sergeants, myself and Sergeant Youngman, but we were in separate cars. So,
Okay.
but yeah,
So you were both at the same location?
we were.
Okay. And did you receive any updates while you drove to the scene?
Yeah, it was a few minutes in, and I believe a TPD officer, Tacoma Police Department officer had arrived and basically told everybody to stand down, and that no one else was needed.
Okay. And what did you do then?
I decided that I needed to go to my sheriff's location because he was my boss at the time, and I needed to ensure his safety.
Okay. And do you recall what time you arrived?
Yeah, it was like 2:35 in the morning.
Okay. What did you see when you arrived at the scene?
I saw, once I finally got there, could find it, I'd never heard of the street before. I saw a white SUV with its headlights on, and I saw two vehicles parked across the street from it. They were patrol cars, sheriff's patrol cars. And then I saw another vehicle just south of the white SUV, which ended up being Sergeant Youngman.
Okay. Were there other law enforcement officers there?
No, I didn't see any others, excuse me.
Okay. Anyone else from the sheriff's department?
Yes, there were. There were two deputies that had those marked patrol cars. I saw them. I didn't know who they were at the time. They were relatively new. At the time, I thought they were from our resident detachment out across the Narrows Bridge. I've subsequently learned that they were working in University Place.
Okay. So it was you, the two deputies, anyone else from the sheriff's department?
There was Sheriff Ed Schroyer.
Okay. Did Sergeant Youngman make it there?
Yes, he got there a little before me.
Okay. Do you recall if there were any other Tacoma police officers who were still there?
I didn't see any.
Okay. Was the newspaper carrier still there?
No.
Okay. And was anyone speaking with Sheriff Troyer?
Yeah, I think he kind of engaged all of us, but I know the other younger deputies kind of made their way off to the side a little bit, and it was just kind of Sergeant Youngman and I talking to the sheriff.
Okay. And where was Sheriff Troyer in relation to the SUV?
He was just standing next to the driver's side, B-pillar, front bumper, that kind of thing. Yeah.
So what happened next?
He said something to the effect of, this guy just showed up. And then I don't know how the conversation changed. But I gleaned from what was happening that everything was okay now. You want me to continue?
Hold on. Well, who initiated the conversation? Let me start there. With
think-
you and the sheriff.
I think just casually, I think we both kind of said, hey, what's up, kind of thing, and it was a very low-key conversation.
Did you ask him what happened?
He started to say, this guy just showed up. And then again, the conversation was kind of cut off, and I didn't ask anything further because I know Tacoma had already cleared and they'd sent a number of cars there to do an investigation.
Okay. Did Sheriff Troyer volunteer any other information about what had happened?
Not that I can recall.
And what did you do next?
I offered to put a marked patrol car in his driveway that night for his protection.
And did you do that?
He didn't want it.
Okay. Did he say why?
I asked him 3 or 4 times, and he said his wife would be freaked out.
Okay. And do you recall what Sheriff Troyer's demeanor was at this time?
He was calm, kind of as I know him,
Okay.
low-key.
And did you write a report regarding this incident?
I did.
And why did you do that?
We spoke to our lieutenant the next night, and he goes, guys, write a report. So we did.
Okay. And what was your source of information for writing your portion of the report?
Mine was from what we call the CAD, which is computer-aided dispatch, and that's a kind of a printout from what dispatch puts in. And also my report indicated just what I did that night.
Okay. And do you recall the date and time of the report that you submitted?
It was on the 28th,
Okay.
and it was close to midnight then.
Okay.
Yeah,
So the next day.
yes.
And did anyone else at Pierce County Sheriff's Department write a report about this incident?
Yes, Sergeant Youngman did.
And do you recall what Sheriff Troyer was wearing that evening?
Yeah, it looked very professional. He had like a blazer on, a button down, and slacks. I don't recall what his footwear was.
And do you recall how long your conversation with Sheriff Troyer lasted?
Not long. Once he declined needing any protection at his house, I think we're kind of done. And we said, okay, I don't remember what we said as we're getting out of here, but we did.
Okay. What happened next?
I left. I know Sergeant Youngman did, but I don't know what the other deputies did that were there.
Okay. Was Sheriff Troyer still at the scene when you left?
Yes.
Did you become aware at some point that the person who, that the other driver was a newspaper carrier?
I don't know how I learned it, but I did.
Okay. So later that morning, did you talk again with Sheriff Troyer?
Yes.
And how did that come about?
I was at the Parkland Spanaway precinct, which is over by Sprinker, and he called me and said the guy came back to my house and threw a newspaper in my driveway.
And what did you do? Or did you take any action in response to that?
Yeah, I called dispatch and said, can you send another car out there? The guy's returned. I didn't get any sense that there was a threat.
Okay.
But just to clear him out of the area if we could.
And did Sheriff Troyer say anything else to you during that call?
Not really. Oh, yeah, he did. He wanted me to find out what paper carrier the guy worked for, and I said, I'm not gonna do that.
Did he say why he wanted you to do that?
No.
Why did you decide not to do that?
Because I didn't want to start another investigation.
Okay.
It was Tacoma's call. They'd handled it. Unless it was an absolute exigent circumstance, I wouldn't go into another jurisdiction and initiate an investigation.
Ask the witness.
Cross-examination.
Us. Sergeant Blair, just one point of clarification. When you showed up on scene, Mr. Altimer was already gone, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, no further questions.
Redirect? You may step down.
Thank you, sir.
Defense?
Yes.
Witness is excused from this matter. The state's next witness.
Your Honor, our last three witnesses are tomorrow,
All right.
for the reasons previously explained.
Members of the jury, at this time, I'm going to allow you to leave for the day. You've heard this before, and you're probably going to hear it again, but here we go. During this recess and every other recess, do not discuss this case among yourselves or with anyone else, including your family and friends. This applies to your internet and electronic discussions as well. You may not talk about the case via text messages, email, telephone, internet chat, blogs, or social networking websites. Do not even mention your jury duty in your communication on social media such as Facebook or Twitter. If anybody asks you about the case or about the people or the issues involved in the case, you are to explain that you are not allowed to discuss it. Again, you can blame me for that. Do not allow anyone to give you information about the case, including in your electronic communications. If you start to overhear a discussion or receive information about anything related to this case, you must act immediately so that you no longer hear or see it. If you become aware that you or another juror has been exposed to outside information, you must privately notify the court clerk, but do not discuss those matters with other jurors. Do not read, view, or listen to any report from the newspaper, magazines, social networking sites, blogs, radio, or television on the subject of this trial. Do not conduct any internet research or consult any other outside sources about this case, the people involved in this case, or its general subject matter. You must keep your mind open and free from outside information. Only in this way will you be able to decide the case fairly, based solely on the evidence and my instructions of the law. Please return to the jury room by 8:30 tomorrow morning. Thank you. The jury has left the courtroom. Everyone may be seated. Thank you. State.
That's it for today. Like I said, we received their proffer this morning, so we haven't read it. We skimmed it over lunch, but we'd like to address that at 3 o'clock so that we can have a chance to respond. We're going to need to respond verbally. We're not going to be able to churn out a brief in 90 minutes, obviously.
Defense.
You know, Your Honor, we sent it, the court had indicated we should have it in by 9 this morning. And we gave it to counsel last night. I don't remember what time, Karina, that you sent that, but it was about 9:30. And so it was well before the 9 o'clock deadline of this morning because we wanted them to be able to read it. So it's a pretty brief. It's basically dealing with, you know, the evidence rules 401, 2, and 3. It's got a brief description of what Sheriff Troyer's wife would testify to. So I don't think it's going to require a lot of time to review it. I just as soon get it done as soon as we can so we can work on what we need to do for tomorrow.
The state's motion is granted. We will return at 3 o'clock, so the state has a chance to review this. I would note, the offer of proof is very similar to what the defense has said multiple times. Thank you for putting it in writing. I know I ordered it, but it's much easier by looking at it this way. This is a significant issue that's being raised, and so I want to have the full benefit of each side having time to provide their perspective on whether or not this request should be granted. That's why 3 o'clock will work well for the court. I also want to do a little bit of research myself concerning this topic. So anything else from the state?
No, I appreciate that.
Anything from the defense?
No, thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Thank you. So the court will recess until 3 o'clock today.
Thank you so much.